Jason had never considered himself particularly brave, which made the irony of his current situation almost painfully amusing. There he was, floating in a zero-gravity observation lounge aboard the stellar Mirage, loudly gossiping about a woman he had never met, never imagining that the subject of his chatter was sitting 2 seats away. He leaned back in his transparent chair, balancing carefully against the mild hum of the cruiser's artificial gravity, and whispered to his friend Tom, "I swear, if anyone looked like the stories said, it'd be a hazard. Imagine walking through customs with ears like satellite dishes and people still swooning." Tom snorted, barely holding back a laugh. "Dude, maybe don't say that where someone might overhear," he muttered, glancing at the row of unassuming passengers around them. Jason waved a hand dismissively, ignoring him. He had always found it funny how rumors could inflate someone's appearance into a mythical phenomenon. According to every gossip board in the galactic net, Queen Althara of Lithuria had beauty that could literally cause navigational malfunctions in nearby starships. Jason shook his head and whispered again, "I mean, who gets ears like that and still turns heads? It's like nature had a sale on elegance and accidentally included the communication devices too." He stifled a laugh, imagining the Queen towering over interstellar ambassadors with her long ears flicking like warning antennas. The soft hum of the cruiser and the occasional squeak of a maintenance droid provided a serene backdrop, almost like a cosmic lullaby. Jason leaned further, his elbows resting against the transparent console that projected a holographic map of their route through the Betelgeuse sector. He continued his commentary, now moving on to her rumored wardrobe disasters. "And don't get me started on the Lithurian robes," he muttered. "I read somewhere they double as anti-gravity shields, but somehow look like they were stitched by a toddler with a laser embroidery kit." He nudged Tom, who had the grace to cough loudly and shake his head, but Jason ignored him. The absurdity of it all, the way the stories piled onto each other until they became legend, made him laugh, a snorty little sound that he immediately regretted when he noticed a movement out of the corner of his eye. Jason turned sharply. The woman sitting 2 seats over had shifted slightly, as if the weightless air itself bent toward her. Her ears were indeed long, elegant, extending like soft, flexible antennas that caught the ambient light of the observation deck. Her hair shimmered in a subtle gradient of gold and copper, giving the impression that starlight had been trapped in each strand. Her eyes, a warm amber, reflected the holographic stars projected on the ceiling. Jason froze. His mouth opened, but nothing came out, and for a moment he was convinced that his brain had vaporized into the oxygenless void somewhere between his skull and his throat. A soft, melodic voice cut through the zero-gravity hum. "And yet you speak so freely of things you've never seen." Jason blinked rapidly, trying to process the words without panicking. His mind scrambled. He looked around the observation lounge, as if expecting to find a hidden camera or a holographic prank, but the lounge was real. The star charts rotated lazily above them. The cosmic lights reflected off the polished metal walls, and there she was, sitting beside him in her quiet, unsettling majesty. Jason swallowed. Well, His voice cracked in a way that suggested an unplanned decompression. Tom leaned forward, eyes wide, and mouthed, "I told you." Jason wanted to crawl under the console and disappear into a maintenance shaft, preferably one that led to the reactor core. Instead, he managed a cough and a laugh, high-pitched and awkward. "I mean, I was just, discussing interstellar beauty standards," he said, realizing too late that his words sounded like a child defending a spilled juice box. The woman's lips curved ever so slightly. Not quite a smile, but not a frown either. Jason had read somewhere that this expression was an advanced Lithurian form of amusement, a warning wrapped in charm. His brain registered a fact too late. She was assessing him, weighing his wit and courage against his sheer foolishness. Her ears twitched once, twice, and Jason, trying to salvage the moment, said, I read somewhere that long ears help detect starship turbulence. Makes sense, right? Yours must be very sensitive. He winced, immediately recognizing the sound of desperation masquerading as humor. She tilted her head, and her ears followed the motion with a grace that reminded Jason uncomfortably of synchronized satellites. Then she laughed, a low, resonant sound that vibrated in his chest and made him feel simultaneously thrilled and terrified. He laughed back, though it sounded like a hiccup trapped in a vacuum tube. "Curious," she said, voice teasing now. "Do all humans gossip so carelessly?" Jason paused, realizing that this was the first time someone had asked him a question he couldn't answer with humor. "Well," he started, "I like to think we're selective, but mostly, we're very, very careless." He chuckled, and she did too, her laughter mingling with the soft hum of the cruiser's engines. Jason noticed that the other passengers seemed oblivious, which was either a testament to the Queen's subtlety or his own sudden invisibility. The conversation shifted gently, sliding from gossip to personal anecdotes, both awkward and humorous. She told him about the difficulties of balancing interstellar diplomacy with the practical annoyances of long ears, like accidentally knocking over teacups during council meetings. Jason shared the story of the zero-gravity food fight he had unintentionally started in the cruiser's mess hall, which involved a floating loaf of bread, 3 angry engineers, and a very confused maintenance droid. They laughed, the tension easing slightly, and Jason began to realize that this encounter, terrifying as it was also profoundly human, or at least profoundly relatable. As the cruiser drifted further into hyperspace, the stars stretching like silver ribbons outside the observation deck, Jason felt a shift within himself. What had begun as foolish gossip had transformed into a strange connection, built on humor, curiosity, and the unspoken acknowledgement that they were both observing each other, testing boundaries and finding delight in the absurd. And as the Queen's ears twitched ever so slightly at his next poorly delivered joke, Jason thought, not for the first time, that perhaps the universe had a peculiar sense of humor. Time passed differently in zero gravity. Minutes stretched into a gentle, floating eternity, punctuated by laughter, shared stories, and the occasional awkward silence. Jason realized that he was learning more about Althara in these few minutes than he ever could from gossip boards or interstellar news feeds. And she, it seemed, was learning about him too, in small, subtle gestures. The nervous shift of his fingers, the accidental tilt of his chair, the ridiculous pride in surviving a minor zero-gravity mishap. By the time the lounge began to fill with passengers preparing for the next segment of their journey, Jason felt a strange combination of relief and anticipation. He had survived the accidental revelation of gossiping about the galaxy's most notorious queen, and somehow, he had done so without completely embarrassing himself into oblivion. But the lingering amusement in her amber eyes and the twitch of her long ears hinted that this was only the beginning. Whatever this encounter was, it promised to be far stranger, far funnier, and far more intriguing than he could have imagined. And Jason, despite himself, was ready to find out exactly how. Jason woke the next cycle with a mixture of dread and anticipation. He had spent most of the cruiser's night cycle replaying the lounge incident in his head, each replay accompanied by a slightly louder, increasingly embarrassed laugh. Somewhere in the middle of the third replay, he had imagined himself launching into space via an emergency pod to avoid further humiliation, only to realize he had forgotten which button actually opened the pod. He sighed, flopping into the gravity-adjusted seat by the viewport, and found that the stars outside weren't quite stars. They were streaks of color stretching in long, elegant trails as the stellar mirage glided through a hyperspace corridor. Breakfast in the galley was an ordeal in minor zero-gravity chaos. Jason tried to keep his bowl of synthetic cereal from floating away, while simultaneously adjusting to the unusual effect of microgravity on his digestive system. A floating cube of oat-like substance collided with his forehead, and he yelped, sending it spinning toward a group of chatty engineers. "Ah, breakfast, the perfect time for a zero-G encounter," he muttered. One engineer turned to him and gave a polite, if confused, nod before dodging the cube. Jason swore under his breath, trying to figure out if gravity would ever stop playing tricks on him, or if he would become the galactic embodiment of slapstick comedy. He was halfway through maneuvering the cube back into his bowl when a familiar presence made itself known. Althara had arrived, gliding into the galley as though the zero gravity didn't exist for her at all. Her long ears twitched once in greeting, brushing against the soft hum of the galley's energy fields. She carried a floating tray with precise, effortless motions, balancing several items without even a glance. Jason attempted a casual wave and instead ended up spinning backward a few inches before bumping gently against the wall. "I meant to do that," he said, voice pitched high, which only drew a small, amused tilt of her head. Althara's presence had a curious effect on him. He wanted to speak in clever quips and witty anecdotes, but every time he opened his mouth, gravity seemed to conspire against him. "You're efficient," he stammered, watching her manipulate floating containers of liquid without spilling a drop. Her amber eyes glinted, clearly amused. "And you, Jason, are unpredictable," she replied, her voice calm but teasing. The contrast between her poise and his floundering made him feel like a holographic clown in a cosmic circus, which, in his mind, was somehow entirely appropriate. They ended up sharing a table, floating slightly above the floor in magnetic chairs that allowed limited movement. Jason attempted to impress her with tales of his previous missions that had mostly involved misplacing tools, confusing star charts, and inadvertently locking himself in storage compartments. But each story came out laced with self-deprecating humor. Althara listened attentively, occasionally raising an eyebrow, letting her long ears twitch with subtle reactions. Jason couldn't help but notice that those ears seemed almost like mood indicators. When she tilted them forward slightly, it meant amusement. When they flicked back, mild annoyance. It was impossible to misread, unless, of course, you were a nervous human juggling cereal and a tray simultaneously. After breakfast, they moved to the cruiser's central holographic hub. The room was filled with swirling projections of star systems, wormholes, and planetary surveys. Jason floated toward one projection, accidentally tapping a cluster of holographic satellites, which promptly launched into a chaotic spiral. "Ah," he said, hands raised in mock surrender. "I assure you, this is an advanced interstellar demonstration of, anti-satellite choreography." Althara tilted her head, one ear twitching, and laughed lightly. "Interesting," she said, "though I suspect you invented that chaos yourself." Jason grinned sheepishly, secretly pleased that she seemed entertained rather than furious. Althara proposed a small challenge, phrased lightly as a game. Navigating a holographic maze of rotating star systems while maintaining control over simulated spacecraft. Jason accepted immediately, though he quickly realized she had no intention of letting him win. The maze bent in impossible ways, twisting dimensions and rotating gravity wells, and Jason spent several minutes flailing in zero gravity, laughing as he collided with holographic asteroids and wormholes. Althara, meanwhile, glided effortlessly, her ears acting almost like sensors as she anticipated every twist. "You're entertaining," she said, though not particularly effective at navigation. Jason laughed, falling backward into a soft energy field that cushioned him. "Hey, I call it dramatic flair," he said. "Keeps the mission interesting." After multiple rounds, they paused, both floating in a small pocket of the hub's magnetic field. Jason's chest heaved, partly from exertion, partly from the surreal thrill of this bizarre interaction. Althara leaned closer, ears brushing against a softly glowing control panel, her expression more playful than ever. "You adapt quickly," she noted. "Most humans would have panicked entirely." Jason smirked. "I panic with style." She tilted her head, considering him, and then chuckled, a sound that vibrated in the metal ribs of the hub. It was impossible not to respond, and Jason found himself grinning like an idiot. The conversation meandered from starship maneuvers to cultural quirks. Althara shared tales of Lithurian council meetings where delegates argued over the proper curvature of diplomatic robes, and Jason replied with human office anecdotes involving the misuse of holographic staplers. Laughter became their currency, easing the tension and forging a delicate camaraderie. Jason realized he was learning more about her through humor and observation than he could have by reading 100 interstellar archives. At one point, Jason dared to tease her gently about her ears. "You know, if you weren't queen, you could probably get a job as a navigation system," he said, pointing vaguely at her swaying ears. Althara laughed, a melodic sound that bounced off the hub's walls, and replied, "And if I did, I suppose I'd have to endure lectures from mischievous humans like you." Jason nodded solemnly, earning another laugh. The balance between challenge and humor was delicate, but they were navigating it with surprising ease. By the time the hub's lights dimmed for the cruiser's energy recharge cycle, Jason felt a strange, dizzying mix of exhilaration and relief. What had begun as a casual, foolish encounter had become a slow, teasing exploration of personalities, abilities, and humor. Althara's playful tests, combined with her subtle grace and the twitch of her long ears, created a dynamic that made Jason both nervous and ridiculously curious. He realized that this was no ordinary acquaintance. The Queen of Lithuria had invited him into her orbit, and he was both terrified and delighted to accept. As he floated back toward his cabin, Jason reflected on the day's events. He had survived his initial embarrassment, made the Queen laugh multiple times, and discovered that humor could bridge even the vast gulf between human and Lithurian sensibilities. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he acknowledged that the day had only strengthened a strange connection that had begun in the observation lounge. A connection that promised mischief, laughter, and perhaps adventure across the stars. Even in zero gravity, Jason realized, some encounters had a way of grounding you in unexpected ways. And the twinkle of amusement in Althara's amber eyes haunted him, making him eager for whatever cosmic absurdity awaited them next. The stellar mirage drifted through the Lithurian sector, with the kind of quiet elegance that made Jason feel both insignificant and ridiculously alive. He floated near the cruiser's command deck, hands tucked awkwardly into the magnetic grips of his chair, watching Althara move with effortless grace as she monitored the approaching Lithurian space station. Her long ears twitched now and then, catching subtle vibrations in the hull that even the sensors missed. Jason found himself staring at them, then quickly shaking his head, reminding himself that staring at a queen's ears probably qualified as interstellar misconduct. He tried to distract himself by reviewing the mission briefing, but the words blurred into nonsense, and he gave up, deciding that watching her was, if nothing else, highly educational and slightly dangerous to his pulse. Althara finally noticed him staring and gave a small, sideways tilt of her head. "You're unusually quiet," she said, voice lightly teasing but tinged with curiosity. "Are you considering the consequences of your behavior, or simply pondering how you survived my games yesterday?" Jason coughed, his voice cracking in a way that made him want to disappear into the gravity-adjusted floor. "I'm reflecting on the complexity of interstellar etiquette," he said. She raised an eyebrow, one ear flicking to the side. "Interesting," she said. "That's the first halfway coherent excuse I've heard from a human." Jason chuckled nervously, realizing that humor had become his saving grace more than once in her company. The docking sequence with the Lithurian station was a delicate ballet of magnetic clamps, tractor beams, and synchronized thrusters. Jason, normally confident in piloting simulators, fumbled with the manual override controls while Althara floated nearby, calmly issuing instructions that somehow made him feel both foolish and capable at the same time. "Don't panic," she said, her voice calm as liquid gravity. "The station won't implode if you make mistakes." Jason grinned, replying, "I'll try to keep it to minor explosions then." She chuckled, a low sound that reverberated off the metallic walls and made Jason's chest tighten oddly. Once docked, they navigated the station's winding corridors, Jason carefully following her lead. He marveled at the architecture, floating platforms, corridors that twisted at impossible angles, and walls that shimmered with dynamic light displays. Althara moved like she had memorized every twist, her ears occasionally brushing against walls in a way that seemed deliberate, almost musical. Jason realized he had grown accustomed to the subtle cues those ears provided, a silent language he now instinctively read. In a strange way, he felt connected to her, as though her presence had recalibrated his senses. Their first stop was the council chamber, where Lithurian diplomats prepared for discussions about interstellar trade agreements and planetary protections. Jason had expected a tense, formal environment, but instead found an absurd mixture of ceremonial gravity-defying hats, floating beverage trays, and the occasional minor argument over the proper alignment of holographic banners. He whispered to Althara, "This is like watching a zero-gravity circus with diplomats." She laughed, a genuine melodic sound that made Jason's stomach flip. "And yet," she said, "somehow we get things done." When it came time for introductions, Jason felt a flutter of nervousness. The diplomats regarded him with polite curiosity, but it was Althara's subtle nods and occasional ear flicks that guided him through the proper etiquette. He discovered that humor, which had been his lifeline throughout the journey, could also bridge political gaps. When one elder Lithurian delegate hovered awkwardly near a floating teacup, Jason quipped, "Careful, the tea has been known to stage minor rebellions." The room erupted in soft laughter, easing the tension and drawing approving glances from Althara. He realized that his own nervous energy, when tempered with levity, could be a strength rather than a liability. After the formalities, Althara led him to a small observation deck overlooking the Lithurian homeworld. Jason floated closer to the window, watching vast oceans shimmer beneath floating continents, clouds swirling in patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if the planet itself were laughing at its visitors. Althara stood beside him, her presence comforting rather than intimidating. "You've done well," she said softly. "Not many humans can navigate my world without tripping over their own arrogance." Jason laughed, feeling a surge of pride he hadn't expected. "I guess I've leveled up," he said, "from incompetent gossip to semi-functional diplomat." She tilted her head, ear brushing lightly against the observation window, and let out a laugh that vibrated like a gentle hum. The remainder of the journey was filled with smaller adventures, navigating zero-gravity gardens, dodging curious maintenance droids, and experimenting with the station's artificial microhabitats. Jason found himself anticipating each challenge with excitement instead of dread. Althara's presence, her quiet amusement, and the playful tests she devised encouraged him to grow. He was sharper, more observant, and more confident in ways he hadn't imagined. Humor remained their constant, whether it was Jason slipping on a magnetic floor panel or Althara teasing him about his clumsy attempts at zero-gravity diplomacy. In the final moments before returning to the cruiser, Jason reflected on his journey. The man who had once nervously gossiped about a legendary queen in the observation lounge was no longer the same. He had faced embarrassment, uncertainty, and alien social intricacies, and had survived, with laughter intact and dignity mostly preserved. More importantly, he had forged a connection with Althara that transcended formality and status, built instead on humor, shared curiosity, and the delicate dance of mutual respect. As they floated back toward the docking bay, Jason glanced at her, amber eyes meeting his with a mixture of amusement and quiet acknowledgement. He realized that this journey had changed him, not just in skill or confidence, but in perspective. The universe, vast and unpredictable, had room for folly, laughter, and unexpected alliances. And among the stars, he had found that sometimes the most extraordinary connections began with the smallest, silliest moments. A whispered joke, a clumsy gesture, and a queen who listened with patience, curiosity, and just enough mischief to keep life fascinating. They arrived at the cruiser, the stellar mirage humming softly as if aware of their shared triumphs. Jason floated beside Althara one last time, ears flicking lightly against the ambient light. "So," he said, trying for casual charm, "do we call this diplomacy or just extreme sightseeing?" She tilted her head, a laugh escaping her lips, the kind that made him want to tell every human in the galaxy to take notes. "Call it," she said, "a lesson in human adaptability." Jason grinned. "Then I'll need a transcript for my memoirs, from gossip to galactic hero." She chuckled again, the sound blending with the gentle hum of the cruiser, and Jason realized that for the first time in his life, he had a story worth telling, and a companion who made the universe feel both enormous and strangely intimate at the same time. As the cruiser glided toward the stars, Jason allowed himself a private smile. He had grown, learned, and laughed in equal measure. He had survived his foolishness, embraced adventure, and discovered that humor could navigate even the most alien waters. And somewhere nearby, the Queen's long ears twitched with a quiet, approving amusement, reminding him that the galaxy, for all its vastness, had a sense of humor. And now he was part of it.